At the height of its power, the influence of the ancient Greek civilization stretched from southern Spain, France, and Italy to the shores of the Black Sea and southward to the Libyan coast as far as Egypt. But historically, the reach of this rich and vital culture has extended even further to form the basis of what we know as Western civilization. Long before the Hermitage Museum housed in these vast palaces was even dreamt of, Russian leaders, beginning with Peter the Great, saw value in the art of ancient Greece and Rome and began to assemble a special collection at the Hermitage. This premier collection has rarely been seen outside of Russia. The ancient Greeks believed that man is the measure of all things. They made their gods human, and their humans into gods, honoring the order of nature and reason above all. Know thyself, commanded the Greek maxim, for the good life, harmony and beauty are the direct result of the cultivation of the mind and the body. The Greeks invented the concept of democracy. The Platonic ideal, the logic of Aristotle, the legends of Homer were all products of the Greek civilization. Their immense achievements in mathematics, science, philosophy, and art have influenced the Western world for thousands of years. Aphrodite was their goddess of love and fertility. She stands surrounded by figures of her son, the winged Eros. Because so much of the art of ancient Greece, particularly the paintings, have been destroyed, ceramics have become the key to tracing the development of Greek art. This young woman's head is a vessel for wine. Her archaic smile is typical of the statues of this early phase of Greek art, the 7th to 6th centuries BC, some 2,500 years old. These earliest Greek artists followed the lead of the Near East, representing the human form as symmetrical and static with a fixed expression. But by the 4th century BC, dynamic, naturalistic poses had entered Greek art. The goddess Athena prepares to strike a giant in this composition devoted to a battle between the gods and giants. Heracles raises his club to deliver his enemy a crushing blow. Hundreds of names were coined to denote vessels of differing sizes, shapes, and designs. This is a crater. The pelike was a storage jar. One of the outstanding masterpieces in the Hermitage collection is the Swallow's Arrival, from about the 5th century BC. New to those days was the so-called red-figured technique. The characters in red stand out against a dark background. The 3 ages of man, a youth, and a boy, greet the swallow. The Greek inscriptions read, "Look, the first swallow," says the youth. "Yes, a swallow, by Heracles," exclaims the man. "Spring has come." Before the invention of the red figure technique, Greek vases depicted figures as black silhouettes against a red background. You can see how the new method allows rendering of detail on the red background, increasing the refinement of the figures. The lines on the red were drawn with a syringe-like tool that applied black glaze evenly. To achieve ideal beauty, the Greeks applied mathematical order to the human form. The famous 5th century BC artist Polykleitos explained his system of proportions in a written treatise. His ideas were implemented by other artists, such as the creator of this bronze statuette of the athlete. The athlete represented the ideal, a healthy mind in a healthy body, a free man competing with his peers, naked and unfettered by any element foreign to his body. The Greeks not only had the competitive spirit, they practically invented it. It is better to die at Olympia than to withdraw. Trainers were known to call to their athletes. Always be the best and excel above others, Peleus called out to his son Achilles, as Achilles left home for the Trojan Wars. Following Polykleitos, this face is divided into 3 equal parts: the forehead, the nose, and the chin. The features convey the notion of the beautiful and the valiant in one man, Doryphorus, the spear-bearer. This basalt head is actually a Roman copy of an original by Polykleitos. Here we see the Greek love of individual achievement. They valued it above the status of birth or wealth. The aim of Greek education was to create a man who was beautiful and virtuous, trained in music, dance, and in physical exercise. The helmeted Athena was the Greek goddess of war. She was said to spring fully formed and already armed from the head of Zeus, her father. Athena, the warlike virgin, was full of energy and action. However, she avoided senseless violence, choosing instead to win her battles with boldness and wisdom. The statue is a Roman copy of the work of the Greek artist Chrysalis. Athena was also the goddess of craftsmen. She almost lost her virginity to Hephaestus, the god of smiths, but she vanished from her bridal bed at the moment of truth. Not only was Athens, now the capital of Greece, named after her, but the Parthenon was erected in her honor. The work is similar to a gigantic statue of Athena, which once formed the focal point of the Parthenon. This calm, assured, and handsome warrior once embodied the might of Athens at its height. It was she who helped the hero Odysseus on his epic voyage back home to Athens at the end of the Trojan Wars. The long gown is the ceremonial dress of Greek women, the pelos. Like many civilizations before them, the ancient Greeks invented their architecture in the service of their gods. At the Hermitage, the hall of 20 columns is a recreation of a Greek temple. The Greeks first began to build temples in about the 7th century BC. In the centuries that followed, they refined the design in successive structures until, in the 4th century BC, the most perfect temple ever built was created, the Parthenon. The wooden roof was the only weak point. The mosaics and paintings that once covered the floors and walls were destroyed when the roofs were burned by invaders or collapsed, letting in the wind and weather. Unlike the paintings sealed in Egyptian tombs, these artworks were vulnerable to destruction. Because of its elegance, this water vessel was named Regina Vasorum, or Queen of Vases. Although it dates from the 5th century BC, it is perfectly preserved. It was discovered in a tomb at the ancient city of Campania in Italy. It was probably made for export to Italy. Sophisticated Greek techniques of vase production, which included relief figures and polychrome painting, led to a strong export business. A ring of gilt lions and fantastic beasts, both Eastern motifs, encircle the vase. Highlighting the Hermitage's collection is a group of pottery figure vessels found in the grave sites of distant Greek colonies. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. The siren, half woman, half bird, was likely used to store fragrant oil. The soft coloring and light gilding of this vessel shows the typical Greek use of color. In the Sphinx, we see the classically beautiful face and breasts of a woman, combined with the body of a lion and the painted wings of a bird. The figure of the Sphinx is borrowed from 7th century BC Egyptian art. Actually, in Egypt, the Sphinx did not have wings. Zeus is pictured in this cameo from the 3rd century BC in the Greek colony of Alexandria. Also from Alexandria comes the famous Gonzaga Cameo, portraying the pharaoh and his wife. This ornament is almost as valuable for its history as for its beauty. It once belonged to the Gonzagas, the Dukes of Mantua in Renaissance times. In 1794, Napoleon took it from the Vatican as part of the spoils of war. In 1814, after the Russians defeated Napoleon, Josephine presented it to Tsar Alexander I, who placed it in his personal collection here in the Hermitage. Now let us turn to the refined and intimate world of private family life in ancient Greece. In this Hermitage room, surrounded by a colonnade, we are whisked back to an antique house. These houses usually were built without windows, but the room surrounded an interior courtyard open to the sky. Statuettes of lively, playful children were particularly popular, like this boy riding a dolphin. By the Hellenistic era, the 3rd to the 1st centuries BC, statuary had become lively and naturalistic. Boy with the Duck is a Roman copy of a Greek statue. In the joyful naturalism of this plump child, we see that Greek sculpture has completely liberated itself from the static, archaic forms of representation. Even the gods are depicted in very relaxed human poses. This terracotta statuette from the 4th century BC looks like an ordinary woman with a child. But it is actually meant to represent the goddess Aphrodite playing with her son Eros. The creators of terracotta were called sculptors of women. Many of them were influenced by the images of the Greek sculptor Praxiteles. His work emphasized lyricism and an earthy, sensual quality. The statuettes give an amazingly detailed account of the clothing and hairstyles of ancient Greek women. They were made in molds of fine clay. The surface was coated with a watery wash of clay and then painted with mineral dyes. Some details, such as jewelry, were touched with gilding. Daily life was the subject. Women were depicted in solitary, intimate activities. The statuettes usually are called Tanagra statuettes, after the town where they originated. Although statuettes were made elsewhere, the Tanagra craftsmen were considered the best. They stood out not only in artistic quality, but in their higher technical standards. Some of the parts were cast in molds. When the mold parts were trimmed to remove the marks of the mold, the rest of the statuette would be carved by hand. When the sculpting was complete, they were dried for a period of time, painted, and then baked. The sculptors could produce these figurines in great quantity, and many copies were made. This way, many could own a piece of great artwork they could not otherwise be able to afford. In spite of the incredible artistic and intellectual energy, the Greek civilization was not destined to last forever. Ancient Greece never was actually one nation, but a collection of city-states, each of which retained its fierce independence. They shared the bond of Greek language and culture, but chronic warfare between the city-states sapped the military power of Greece. From the Trojan Wars to the constant rivalry between Athens and Sparta, domestic battles took their toll. In the fateful year 146 BC, the Roman war machine sacked Carthage and Corinth and brought the entire Greek region under its domination. Jupiter was the supreme god of ancient Rome. By the 2nd century AD, Rome would rule all of Europe up to the borders of Scotland, and also the Near East, Egypt, and North Africa. In this statue, Jupiter holds the goddess Victory in one hand, and in the other, a scepter, the symbol of power over the whole world. But in spite of Rome's victory, the Roman conqueror became a prisoner of Greek culture. Greek intellectuals and craftsmen may have been taken as slaves, but they brought the Greek spirit to Rome. Rome kept alive Greek culture by following in the footsteps of Greek art and architecture, and by making direct copies of many artworks. Idealistic Greek images gave way to visions of Roman power. Portraits of the grief of conquered peoples were testimonials to that power. The head of a Dacian captive dates from the 2nd century AD. The many Roman copies of Greek works at first led some to believe that Rome's only contribution to art was to preserve and spread Greek culture. But this imperialistic and powerful nation actually used Greek forms and technical skills to create a body of artwork that reflected its own treasured concepts: power, the state, and law. Idealized images such as this goddess still were created. But what was Roman can be seen in portraiture. Suspicion and fear knit the brows of the Emperor Philip the Arabian, reflecting the troubled times of the declining empire in the 3rd century AD. Philip, a soldier, took control of the empire by executing his predecessor. But he was killed by his own army when they chose Dacius, one of Philip's subordinates, as their new leader and emperor. Outside of portraiture, beautiful, idealized likenesses persisted, echoes of the Greek culture. But Roman elements are present too. This figure represents a combination. In spite of his beauty, he stands in a pose of power. The cape surrounding his shoulders and his gesture show his authoritative attitude. Portrait of a Roman is a Roman bronze from the Republican period. This era dates from the 5th century BC to the collapse of the Republic after the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. Originally, the sculpture's eyes would have been filled with precious stones. The portrait reveals the state of mind of the subject, the veil of resigned sadness. In this graceful Roman goddess, you see the influence of two Greek sculptors. Her shifted weight and resulting fluid pose that creates the illusion of movement shows the influence of the Greek sculptor Polykleitos. Her classic elongated proportions follow the theories of the Greek sculptor Praxiteles. But portraits of real people had irregular features. A young woman of Syrian descent is considered a masterpiece of Roman portraiture. The warrior was a much heralded and worshipped figure in Roman society. He is shown as young, strong, and prepared for battle in his helmet. Unlike portraits of the emperors, his countenance displays no trace of doubt. Upon his shoulders rested the burden of enforcing the continuation of the empire in a hostile world. As the representative of so many, he is idealized. Roman sculptors of marble did not sign their works, and their names are unknown to us. Some of them may have been Greek slaves brought to Rome for their artistic talents. But no matter who they actually were, they combined the Greek tradition, now in service to Roman values, in this case, the power of the emperor. From the 2nd century AD comes this marble bust of the Emperor Lucius Verus. He was co-ruler with Marcus Aurelius. This emperor was not known to have been preoccupied with affairs of state. He preferred amusement. The details of his imperial clothing and breastplate add embellishment to the portrait. He is remembered for the attention he paid to his appearance. He powdered his hair with golden sand. The decline of the empire is reflected in Roman portraiture. Indeed, the colonies revolted, the empire was divided, and rule became anarchy. By the 5th century AD, barbarians had overrun nearly all that was Rome. But the splendid art and ideas of ancient Greece and Rome lived on, as they live on today, an inexhaustible source of inspiration.